Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our fourth session of our Intercultural Liturgy series. And today we're going to deal with questions and answers. This is Pedro Rubalcava, Director of Hispanic Ministries at OCP. And like always, we'd like to recommend that if you have other applications or programs open, you might want to close those because they improve your viewing and sound quality. And even though we're going to be dealing with some questions that you have already sent, we encourage you to, whenever something comes up, a question comes up, that you please type it into your control panel here and in the question section at any time you want, and then we'll get around to your questions. So please, that's what we're about today, questions, and hopefully we have some good answers for you. So let's begin with a prayer. Today we celebrate the feast of St. Catherine of Siena, a wonderful woman, one of my women's saint heroines. And she's a doctor of the church, poet, mystic. And so we'll use the concluding prayer for morning prayer today. O God, who set St. Catherine of Siena on fire, with divine love in her contemplation of the Lord's passion and her service of your church, grant through her intercession that your people participating in the mystery of Christ may ever exult in the revelation of his glory, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. And St. Catherine of Siena, pray for us. Very well. So what I've done is I've grouped questions together that are similar. Some of these we may have covered during some of the sessions, but it's important to, I think, in this context, to look back and understand some of the things that I've said so that it's taken in the right context. So here's three questions that I grouped together. How can you get your choir, various liturgical ministries, and pastors to understand the value of preparation? How do you encourage congregational participation when there seems to be a lot of resistance to bilingual services? Part of the resistance is the length of the service. How do you begin to introduce the concept of enculturation with music when there are not significant numbers of a specific culture, but only a few in number? And those will go into the next screen as well. So let's deal with the first one. I think part of the understanding of the value of preparation, and that's across the board. It doesn't necessarily have to deal with when you're preparing for a multilingual or multicultural or intercultural liturgy. That's just, it makes good sense to understand the value in any perspective, that particularly when it comes to rehearsals for choirs, that you have to be able to understand that in order to achieve perfection, we have to rehearse. And this is a service that we provide for the people of God, and we join the whole community and Christ in offering praise and thanksgiving to God the Father. So there has to be an understanding that across the board, that regardless of the liturgy, we have to prepare, we have to rehearse. There has to be an understanding that we can't just put these liturgies together a month before or a week before. There has to be an ongoing formation so that we open ourselves to transformation. And with regard to the length of the service, I mean, just because we have a multilingual liturgy doesn't mean that we have to repeat everything over and over. Obviously, there'll be some things, for instance, like in the homily, that you will want to tailor to the situation, and the priest will need to work very hard at it to ensure that it's not double the length of what he would normally do, but maybe just to ensure that he has the points within a cultural context that he needs to make for that particular celebration. And there doesn't need to be a repetition of the parts of the Mass or the readings or anything like that. So it has a lot to do with how we plan. So it's connected to that first one. But in terms of encouraging your community to participate, it's just going to have to be over time that people understand that we are all joined together. I'm reminded of one of the quotes that I used in I think it was the first session that I took from Tim Matovina from Notre Dame, and he said, "The house of God isn't holy because all are welcome. The house of God is holy because all belong." And I think there's something to keep in mind, is that as we try to create a community where people feel they belong, then the more holy we will be, the more holy we will be as a community, and people will say, as they did with the early Christians, see how they love. And that's very important. And again, it doesn't come overnight. It's a process of transformation, of conversion, and we all have to, if we really believe that God works in our day and age, then let's do our part. And with regard to the third question, was specifically the question that deals with music, when there aren't significant numbers of a specific culture. I think one of the things to understand is that in different communities, more and more we're finding folks that are of different language groups and different cultures, and we just have to understand where they're at, and part of that has to do with how the community experiences and practices hospitality. But how do we make sure that we on some level are connecting with folks that may not be in our community but could be in our community, or people across town, etc. One of the things that I told you a story about the two Vietnamese families that were in this community when I was in the Diocese of San Diego, and to be able to engage and find out how we might be able to include some of their spirituality. Maybe it's not language, maybe it's something else. In this instance, in the story that I told you before, we learned the song, the little refrain in Vietnamese, but the rest of the song was in English, because that's all the choir could do. And the impact that it had on the two families that were there in the whole parish. So I think to begin to look at what the value that we place on the church as diverse and multicultural, and to be able to, not just because we want to do something else in another language, but to be in solidarity with others. I think that's a good way of looking at it. And how do single language leaders work together towards intercultural goals? I think this is an important question, and the other two are related to that last question in the first slide. How do you include everyone without leaving some feeling neglected? How can a community accommodate different languages in one assembly? And these all go together. Again, it's a question of attitude. I just had recently a call from someone who was looking for some information on a workshop for the Spanish-speaking in parishes in the area, and one of the comments that this person made was to say, the musicianship isn't very good. They sing loud and play loud and things. And he goes, I should rephrase that. It's not what I'm used to. And so part of it has to do with our own experience and how we appreciate other people's prayer experience and worship experience. And what we talked about, the word ethnocentrism, when we think that just our way is the best way or the only way. And we have to shed ourselves of those temptations to think that way. One. The other thing is because so often it is the prevailing culture that's going to say we need to do something about gathering all the people to worship together. And so again, finding folks in the community that are bridge builders, that are going to be your mentors, to help you meet people, to help you understand how people pray in a particular culture. Visit the other language masses, visit the other cultural gatherings, not just the prayer experiences, but also the community gatherings that are social in nature. Go to the different patronal feasts that they celebrate. Feast for Guadalupe is a big one. Go, even if it's all in Spanish, just go, and you'll. I think you won't regret it. It's a good way of understanding how other people pray and how much we are the same. So how do we accommodate different languages in one assembly? We touched a little bit on that. Again, if you haven't already done so, I really recommend that you acquire Liturgy in a Culturally Diverse Community, a Guide Towards Understanding, and that'll be on our resource page, which will tell you a little bit about that in a bit. How do you include everyone without leaving some feeling neglected? Again, one of the comments that we made earlier on is that everyone has to make a sacrifice. I'm reminded of the story of when we were young, and there's 9 of us in our family, my children in our family, and my parents made a decision for the sake of the children, because they understood English better, to start going to the English Mass and not the Spanish Mass. And so it required of them not only a sacrifice, but it required of them then to prepare beforehand, read the readings, and ask us later on what the priest said. So it involves relationships, and we're not going to please everyone. But I think knowing who we have in our community and knowing how we might incorporate and avoid tokenism, of course, but you're going to be surprised how people really react to genuine curiosity, the genuine questions, and genuine hospitality. Everybody really that I've met in wants to learn English. That doesn't mean that they pray better in English, or can understand better in English, or can worship better in English, but they want to feel like they belong. So start there. How often should I include a piece of another language in a small rural community of all English-speaking families? Only one individual is Puerto Rican, but he speaks excellent English. How does a parish support a non-English community when the neighborhood is predominantly white, middle, or upper class? So again, related questions. Recently, with regard to the first question, I was at the parish there, and this lady that I know who's always gone to the Spanish Mass recently, to the English Mass, excuse me, and we recently began a Spanish Mass. And she's from Peru, and her children are bilingual, but she's always gone to the English Mass because she lives in that community, and that's where she feels okay. Her English is okay, it's not the best. I ran into her and said, I've wanted to come to the Spanish Mass, but tell me a little bit about it. I said, come. And then the very next week, she came and she says, I want to pray in my own language. I want to be able to recite the prayers that I knew as a little girl up until the time that I came to the U.S. And afterwards, she came up to me and said, thank you for being a part of this community and for inviting me to come. And I'm going to come more often. And I'm going to bring my children. So there's, again, it's how do we, when we begin to look at what we're doing, even if it's just all Spanish Mass, do we include, bilingual songs? Even if it's just an all English Mass, do we include some bilingual songs or something that's going to, for the sake of the people that are in our community, we look out and see who's there. How do we make people feel like they belong? And not for the sake of nostalgia, but for the sake of being one. With regard to the predominantly white middle to upper middle class, I think one of the things that I would recommend that I've seen happen in several communities is that they do we'll call it a partnering, but it's more of a padrino, a sponsor relationship with a parish maybe it's in a less affluent neighborhood, and that they share. I've known places that have shared choirs that come to sing at each other's masses, and we'll share, the pastor will come and preside, and so that there's a development of how we understand the other and an appreciation for the other as our fellow Christian, as our brother and sister. And so anything that we can do from that perspective, whether it's, I recommend people in your own communities, cities, etc. But I've also known people that through their extension supporting ministries in a foreign country, for instance, in Mexico or Puerto Rico or something like that, they have an exchange, and communities will go continually, and they have developed an appreciation for how the other prays, how the other worships and lives, and that has helped then that particular community come into contact with the spirit of what worship is. And we share the Roman liturgy, but there's different expressions of that. And again, this is, how many multilingual songs are appropriate to use if the majority speaks the same language? I think we've touched on that. It's important to, like I've mentioned earlier, look at the multilingual versions there are of a particular song and begin to incorporate them into your repertoires. And so maybe it's a song that you sing frequently for a communion song, and it happens to have a bilingual version. Well, let's try to use that. Let's teach the people how to use that. Not that we have to do it all the time, but the more we use it, the better we become familiar with the song. And as far as the guiding the selection, we have to look at how we're going to develop our repertoire for the long haul. And so learning, for instance, if you're in a bilingual community, learning a bilingual mass, a mass that can easily be sung in English and in Spanish and learned in either language. And then so that at least the melody and the words are there. And one of the things I've done at times is actually experiment with it and done it. I said, it doesn't matter the language you're going to sing, the way you sing it in your mass, that's the way we're going to sing it. That's our response. And it sounds great. It doesn't, people seem to think that was a cool thing, if I may use that word, cool. And what parts are the most appropriate for multilingual songs? Again, when we talked about the different forms of song, we talked about the litanies, we talked about call and response, we talked about the responsorial type of songs with short refrains, we talked about using Latin refrains or learning parts of the Mass that in Latin, for instance, the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. It would be very simple to teach to the whole community and maybe have that. I mentioned the one community who during Lent they learned the Cantus Missae, the Latin parts for the acclamations. Those are things that we can begin to use because in my experience they work, but it has a lot to do with the attitude that we bring to it. So in terms of what we might sing, the processional pieces that we have, try not to use hymns because there's hard. It would be difficult for the people to learn the whole hymn in one language or the other, and most hymns tend to be more lengthy, and so even if you sing a verse in English and a verse in Spanish and a verse in Vietnamese, well, that's a lot that goes on without people having a chance to sing if they have difficulty with the language. So again, try to avoid long stretches of times when you just do one language. And so taking into account the various forms that we just mentioned, but also looking at the parts of the ordinary of the Mass that are going to be relatively simple to teach and to rehearse and to use with people at Mass. I'd like to encourage you to, if you haven't already done so, if you have any other questions or need more clarity on some of the answers I've already given, please submit your questions using that control panel. Is it acceptable or appropriate to sing some parts of the Mass in a different language? For example, the Mass is in English, then the Lord's Prayer will be sung in Chamorro, the local dialect of Guam. Jesse's Guamish, as my daughter said, Chamorro, when she was real little, of course. So, is it appropriate? Yes, absolutely, it's appropriate. Like I mentioned, maybe you want you want to learn one of the parts of the Mass just in Spanish, some of the shorter ones. I don't recommend necessarily the Lord's Prayer. This is something interesting. If the majority, the base language is English, the Lord's Prayer is one of those prayers that everybody learns from their youth for the most part. Lots of folks know that. And in the language, one of the things that I've done in places that I've been, and I recommend to people, is just encourage people to pray the prayer in their mother tongue. And so they'll do the Lord's Prayer in different languages. And it actually sounds, it's a wonderful sound to me. And so learning the Lord's Prayer in Chamorro might be a task that everybody does. I don't recommend that be the prayer that we start with, but because people only, it's one of the few prayers that people know by heart, and particularly if you have people come from, only on occasion to Mass, and they happen to come on Easter, or they happen to come to the Easter Vigil and to accompany their family member who is going to be baptized and received into the church, and we start praying, that in a language that's not the base language, people are going to have a hard time participating. So just to keep that in mind. Do you suggest that we should not pray the Eucharistic prayer in a different language, or is it so commonly known by the people that come to bilingual Masses that they could follow when the priest does different parts of the Eucharistic prayer in both languages? I'm going to read what the Liturgy in a Culturally Diverse Community, A Guide Towards Understanding by the FDLC actually says here. And this is in page 14, if you have that document, you can make a note of it. But this is in a section called Proclaiming the Euchology, or the prayer texts. The Eucharistic prayer, because it is the assembly's one prayer of praise and thanksgiving, ought not to be proclaimed in more than one language. The principal or base language of the assembly would ordinarily be employed for its proclamation. It is highly desirable that a Eucharistic prayer familiar to the assembly be chosen to facilitate everyone's participation in this, the center and high point of the entire celebration. And then it goes on to say, the New English translation of the Roman Missal poses special challenges given its more unusual vocabulary and sentence structure. It is especially important that the priest-celebrant take time to prepare the prayer texts, noting when to pause and the words to emphasize. This preparation will help make these texts intelligible to the whole assembly, especially to those who do not have a complete mastery of English. So some very good suggestions, recommendations. And also there's a footnote with regard to that first phrase about proclaiming only in one language the Eucharistic prayer. And this is taken from the instruction on the Eucharist, Redemptionis Sacramentum, on certain matters to be observed or to be avoided regarding the Most Holy Eucharist. It should be noted that this section is concerned with the language competence of concelebrants and does not specifically refer to multilingual assemblies. So just to put that in context, I think it'd be important. So, but above all, that as we mentioned, that the clergy also need to be prepared, and preparing the collects will be important, and to be able to say, let us pray, oremos, and to call people to prayer, and to allow that silence that is called for in the rubrics, to allow people to enter into the spirit of the prayer. And I know I've been to places that priests are actually very bilingual, and they flip back and forth, and so I just to kind of take a look at what the guidelines are saying, but also who is going to be praying makes a lot of difference as well. Who's going to be presiding. And this is with regard to confirmation and at the parish, at the deanery confirmation and Pentecost for this year. There are some wonderful songs, speaking about music, that can be used throughout the year, but especially on Pentecost Sunday. There's several that are multilingual. There are settings of the Pentecost sequence that are with the refrain in Latin and verses that can be sung either in English or Spanish. Taizé has a wonderful setting of that would work. Christopher Walker has a wonderful setting that, even though the refrain is just in Latin and the verses in English, I think would work very well. There are bilingual versions. The one that comes to mind is Bob Hurd's Envía tu Espíritu, envía tu Espíritu, sea renovada. And there's part of the repertoire that we have here. There's also psalm responses that are bilingual that you could use that would work very well for this feast. And also consider just using all Spanish or all Vietnamese piece or all English piece for something. And again, working towards developing a common repertoire is going to be huge in this regard. With regard to the traditional music of culture, when we're talking about translations, and again, they say they've seen many songs that are translated from the English to the Spanish. Can we see examples of how we could use some of the traditional music in Spanish effectively translated into English or bilingual masses? Absolutely. When we talked about last week forming the repertoire, we suggested songs that are in many languages. For instance, Pescador de Hombres is a song that is, in my knowledge, probably in 22 languages or even more. I mean, you can search for Pescador de Hombres in different languages, and you'll find Japanese, you'll find Arabic, you'll find Filipino, English, Spanish, German, Polish. It happened to be one of John Paul II's favorite songs, and so it's very popular in Polish. So that's a suggestion there. For instance, you have come to the seashore, and that would be one. It's not a traditional song, but it's certainly one that has been around for quite some time. And some people, because they're of their age, they say, well, that's traditional because it's the song is older than them. So and another song, and this isn't necessarily an older song, but this is a song that I absolutely love, and perhaps for a Christmas celebration. This is called Un Niño Nos Ha Nacido from Alberto Taulé, a Spanish composer, and there's an English version of it called A Child Is Born to Us. So I'll sing the Spanish version. It goes, Un niño nos ha nacido, un hijo se nos ha dado, nueva luz nos ilumina, ha nacido el Salvador. And the English works very well. A child is born, a son is given unto us. His light has shone on those in darkness. He shall be called a wonder counselor and the Savior of the world. It flows very nicely. The poetry is lovely, and it can be sung just in English, just in Spanish. And I recommend that, you start looking at some of these that are available, and some of this will include in the resource list that we gave, but do some looking around. Feel free to call us. We'll have the numbers and information later, and there's many songs. One of the resources that we suggested was Unidos en Cristo, which has a large number of English songs, a large number of Spanish songs, common repertoire, and a lot of those that have wonderful translations and bilingual songs as well in there, as well as of Latin repertoire. Okay, if OCP has published a particular song in a language, say English, and there is no available translation and one is brave enough to attempt a translation, how do you go about acquiring copyright permission? And simple enough, call our copyright permission folks. Call here and ask for Jared by name. He'd be the one that he'd probably be angry at me because he's going to be inundated with calls, but I'll buy him a sarsaparilla or something. But call him or just ask for copyright permission. And what we'll do is we want to ensure, like I mentioned last time around, that we want to ensure that it is a good translation, that the accents are placed properly. We want to ensure that theologically it's saying the same things, and again, then that second question, is it okay for any given song without permission? Obviously, we have to try it out, huh? So I would recommend that if it's done by committee, better. I told you the story about how I went to the sacristan, my Filipino friend, the sacristan, and then I said, "How do you say this?" He said, "This is how you say it." I set it to music. I sang to him, and he said, "That's great." And then I took it to the choir to practice, and they said, "No," they all laughed. "That's not right." So again, who do we have checking our work? Make sure they're competent musicians, make sure they're competent with the language, etc. And if you're going to project it, if you're going to include it in a worship aid, you need to seek permission for reprint. And this is somewhat related. We have been using psalms from a few different sources. However, I have developed a sense of community by including composers and musicians from each of the language community groups to write verses for the psalms. Is that legal given that we only sing it in our community regarding projection? Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you for developing that sense of community by including musicians and composers in your community. And as far as writing the verses of the Psalms, I think depending on if I'm understanding correctly, I hope I am, it's not the translation of the English, but it's a translation that you use from the context from which the scripture comes from. So look, I hope, and I'm assuming you do, you're looking at the text in the given language, in Spanish or Vietnamese or whatever the language might be. Taking it from the original source, and if it's a case that it's all original music, cool. But again, the caution that I would make is, how are we using that particular? Is it sometimes when we're then just translating from the original, from English, for instance, it becomes a paraphrase, and we're missing some of the nuances of the intended text. And as far as the legality of regarding projection, if it's an original thing, we only have to worry about then permission from the USCCB, who holds for the Grail text, whatever psalm text that we're using and where we're using it from. If we're taking it verbatim, how are we using it? So those are the questions that come into play there. And I would recommend that if you have doubts, feel free to call us. You can also go to even some great information is to go to the libraryofcongress.gov, and they have this whole information on copyrights and what is protected and when you should seek copyright. So I would recommend you go there. Are these songs available to purchase separately in October or other such form, rather than buying a whole collection of songs? And I'm glad you're interested in that. Are not our hearts burning with this? That makes my heart happy. That's a song I composed. Yes, and again, we'll have the resource list available for you, and you'll be able to, if I'm understanding correctly, to just go to that link, and it'll take you right to the song, so you're able to download it or to purchase, in one way or another, as an octavo or even the MP3. Are there any authority published liturgical guidelines on using a projection screen with liturgy? I know there are guidelines that different dioceses have. So I went looking for some, and there's some very good suggestions. I did a search on Google, or Google, right? Google, and I just wrote out guidelines for projection in liturgy. And several things came up from different dioceses. Diocese of St. Cloud has one, and DBD, I'm not sure what that diocese is, but they have a whole document called the Liturgy, Data Projector, and You. And this was, I thought it was very good, written by Father Clem Hill, and some very good suggestions in that. So do a search, and I think these will be very helpful. And with regard to music education, there was a comment that was made, one of the questions, that can you tell us a little bit about music education? And this has a lot to do with how different people experience music. I made the comment earlier about someone who says, well, this is just my experience of the music. And so it's important for us to look at how we build relationships between music ministers. And again, not everyone is going to come to music in the same way. There are a lot of oral cultures that learn just by listening, and that doesn't mean that they're any less competent as musicians. Perhaps they learn in a different way. And so sometimes, learning the European way of learning music, the classically trained musicians, and playing exactly what's on the page, whereas you have someone who hears it and plays it in a particular way. And again, it takes, it's another language for folks. And so just like we who are immersed, some of us who are immersed then in the English or European system, where we learn polyphony and choral arranging and such like that, we will use it's an A chord or it's a G minor or whatever it is. And we likewise have to be also knowledgeable about the solfege system that a lot of communities are more comfortable using. So G minor becomes, sol menor, for instance. So that would be important. The other thing is that it's another language. It really is. But I've found over the years in directing choirs at different parishes, that people want to learn, that this is something that once you put the music in front of them and teach them how to make sense of the little lines and dots on the page, people will want to learn because it'll make them better musicians. And so I think that's very important, that particularly in parishes that have a paid music director, that this person, perhaps it's a question of adding that to the job description. How do I then engage with the different other cultural language groups in the community to allow for some formation in music? And I think you'll be surprised how many people in time really want to be that, want to become better musicians and learning that language. So it's important to start young. I mean, there's more openness in the younger generations, and they will have some, not only just in music, but in terms of how they approach worship in different languages. A breath of fresh air for me. So we who are older, I think, should learn about openness from our children and younger generations. Okay, so
we have two additional questions.
Okay, additional questions
were relevant to the presentation. One, It is not uncommon that choirs that sing in English are led by paid musicians, English musicians, rather than Spanish or Vietnamese, for example. So, what can we do when resources are allotted with the majority versus the minority?
Yes. I think this says a lot about, again, the very first session that we talked about. And many times we're talking about, I'll call them injustices, and the investment that's made in the parish as a whole, as opposed to investing in just the prevailing culture. And, there are trained musicians in among the Hispanic communities and among the many Asian communities, Vietnamese and Koreans, and there are people who are competent, and I think we should take it upon ourselves as pastoral leaders to seek them out and to pay them a stipend, to and that there's a conversation between who the director is and these other folks that are coordinators and on some level, so that they receive the liturgical formation necessary, that there is budget made available for materials and resources and repertoire. That's going to be important, and because in the end, it's going to allow us to reach that level of integrated liturgy whereby we can all not only pray together, but certainly live together. And there's a lot of pride among the different communities when one of their own is seen taking a leadership role. And the way that we develop these leaders is going to be very important. Something that came to mind is not just the formation at the local level, but I've over the years I've seen more and more directors of music bring their Spanish speaking coordinator to MPM, for instance, and they want them to get that sense of what the bigger experience of a conference is like, and pastors will bring their Vietnamese or people from different communities in that coordinate their choirs, and they'll bring them, and it's eye-opening for them and for all of us, as we share and they participate and they go back and share that experience and are able to share that excitement about, we sang in parts and there was 1,000 people there and it sounded cool and I was part of that. I've heard firsthand stories about that. So do all you can, please, to invite and to build relationships with folks and to look at the justice issue. That'll be important.
Okay, next question. You covered this previously, but could you give some insights about the best time to introduce new music to your community?
The best time is the right time. Oh, okay. So, here's a thought. There's communities that I'm aware of that have monthly sings. They call them monthly a sing-along or something like that. And wouldn't it be great to incorporate, to have build a custom, maybe it then becomes a tradition of the parish, whereby once a month you just invite everybody, and this is the place where you teach new music regardless of the language, and the different choirs come up and sing and share faith stories. Because in liturgy we don't have the opportunity just to maybe several minutes before Mass to teach a refrain, etc. So, and this is a good way to see how things are going to work, to be able to make them within a context of prayer, that people share a faith story of a song that you might be adding to the repertoire. But the other thing too is that to have some kind of process whereby at all the Masses we take a little bit of time before the liturgy begins to teach something even if you don't use it that particular Sunday. But this is a song I want to teach the refrain. Here's a refrain in Spanish. Here's a refrain in English. Here's a refrain in Vietnamese, and invite someone from the other communities to teach us the right pronunciation. It doesn't take very long, and then we'll do it 2 or 3 Sundays prior to even when we have the intercultural liturgy. That would be important. So these are just some ways of doing it. That we at our parish meetings, that we sing, that we begin our parish meetings with a song that everybody's going to teach for a particular season, for instance. The idea behind Ardia Nuestro Corazón, Our Hearts Burn Within Us, that was the idea, that we teach people in their own language at their own meetings, and then when you bring them together for the common meeting or for a common prayer experience, that these 2 melodies come together and they work, and so we allow then the music to be a tool to lead us to a depth of prayer.
Okay, we have another one. How do you find the right balance of music when you have families that spread from youth that speak English to the older generation who's very traditional, so and speaks Spanish? So how do you find the right balance of music in that case?
That's a great question. Summer, I'm going to let you answer that one. No. This is something I think that we have to take into account, and I'll say something from my own experience, because my parents, my mom to this day is monolingual, has only speaks Spanish, although I think she knows more English than she lets on. That little mom of mine. Okay, but my father. So we all went to Spanish Mass as children, and we learned the repertoire. And certainly, as we were growing older, being a musician, well, I was more, that was in the time of the folk masses and things like that. But I began to create. There was Spanish language songs that we use in our repertoire, and the Spanish masses that were in those days contemporary. That wasn't just the traditional things. And so there was this coming to understand the experience of what it is to live in the U.S. From my parents' side, and we as second generation children being able to appreciate the spirituality of our parents, but being able to form then our own, this multicultural spirituality, because we were involved then going to not only the English Mass, but there was newer things coming up that we were using the Spanish Mass as well. And then, fast forward to when my children were little, and the experience that they have, now the third generation, of how we're going to incorporate not only what my wife and I bring, my wife who is not Latina, and that mix of spiritualities there, and the repertoire that comes in. So it has a lot to do with how we experience faith in the home, and how we have continuity in expressing the faith of our fathers, of our parents, and how we bring that to the whole mix. So what's going on in our youth ministry, for instance, whether it's middle school or high school, are we reaching out to the people who are second and third generation Latinos in this case, or second and third generation Vietnamese, or second and third generation Filipinos, etc. How are we doing within? What does it look like as a whole parish, and what is our outreach? What is our ministry to, with, and for these young people? How do we incorporate music? Are we just addressing just the prevailing culture? The challenge is there. How do we look for everyone? Do we have youth and young adult ministry groupings for the folks that feel more comfortable in Spanish, or feel more comfortable just culturally with a particular group, even if they don't speak the language very well. And I see a lot of that. So many young people that will go to the Spanish Mass, even though they prefer to speak in English, but they prefer to pray the way their parents pray, because culturally it feels better. And so, again, within the context of who the music ministry is being coordinated by at the Spanish Masses, how are we looking at what the expression is that is going to serve the spirituality of the young people? Likewise, in the English Masses that we have, or other language Masses, how are we inviting people to participate in the various generations in ministry in general? So and how is the pastoral team and staff addressing that? Because it's not just a liturgy question, it's a bigger question about parish life.
Awesome. And this is our last question. Someone says, rarely do we have in-services and retreats. So can you give some suggestions on how to present the need and the benefits of bringing your musicians to retreats and in-services?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is all people in ministry, first disciples, then ministers. So to be able to be nurtured and sustained in their journey, in our journey as a disciple, is crucial, particularly those that are involved in ministry. And so to take a look, I would recommend once a year. One of the things that we used to do, one parish that was right around the feast of Saint Cecilia, the patroness of musicians, is to have a day of reflection for all of the musicians. Or, at another parish that I was at, we always had an Advent retreat for all of the parish liturgical ministers. So there's ways of doing that and encourage to bring someone in from the outside. Hopefully there's something magical about that. I guess you bring someone in from the outside and say, oh, there's the expert, right? And then after they leave, well, you can blame everything on him or her if it doesn't work, but that was just joking there. But, I recommend calling, for instance, OCP, our events department, our outreach department. We have a lot of folks that we can recommend that will give you a retreat, a spiritual retreat for your pastoral musicians. It can be done bilingually. It can be done, other folks will do something in English and something in Spanish simultaneously, and then come together at the end to have a common celebration. So there's many ways of doing that, but I honestly recommend that we take heed to nurture and feed and form our parish musicians specifically, but also all our parish ministries as disciples, so that they can become better ministers.
Awesome. That was the last question.
Thank you very, very much. This has been a wonderful experience for me to lead these 4 sessions. And again, you can contact us if you have more questions. We'll send to you an email, I believe, with all of the resources and links to get to the songs that we've talked about. You can view our webinars, the ocp.org/webinars. That's on our website. Or you can go to YouTube. Let's see, it's OCP Live. That's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to that, or you can just go there, and we have all kinds of goodies there, especially those, all 3 of them are up there already, but this one will be up there soon. Thank you very, very much, and I look forward to many more opportunities to serve you.